John Curry back again, CEO of Setanta, the coolest land development lender in the whole wide world. Thank you for joining, sir.
Thank you, sir. I'll take that.
We have to do one of these in person. This is our third episode together, and we gotta get together. I gotta get up to Charlotte, and next episode that you and I do together, we have to do in person.
I don't know if you can see it over my right shoulder. We do have a sort of our my drinks trolley there, and there. While it's not a Pappy's, there is a bottle of Van Winkle that I could be tempted to open, depending on your schedule. So have that as an open invitation next time you're in Charlotte.
You're a gentleman, and I'll make my calendar right so we can make this happen. Beautiful, beautiful. So we touched on a lot last week. I want to dive right back into it, and I jotted down a quote that I'm going to keep here: "Marry the house, date the rate." So I love this.
That as I said, that's from the smartest Irish person in the industry, Margaret Whelan. I'm quoting her. I'm not stealing her slogan.
You're a gentleman, and yeah, you don't want to cross Margaret and have her coming after you. And as you said, the second smartest. We'll settle for the second smartest Scottish person in the industry now for today. It works.
We'll do our best.
All right. So oversupply. Let's talk about that. That's kind of where we left off. Talk to me about it. Just basic supply demand. Where in the world are we? And we talked about, yes, there's kind of an influx of lots being worked on, but how does that really play out over the next few quarters?
Yeah, certainly. So there's lots of different things to it, and people will have different opinions on it. And I'm probably on sort of team. We've been underbuilding for 15 years. Some very smart people disagree with that. They think we've only been underbuilding for a year or two, but we all agree that there's some level of underbuilding. But oversupply is something that you just can't fix easily. And oversupply is always going to be the thing that craters a housing market, just like it craters any other market. And I think if there was one main takeaway I would love for people to get is housing is not some mystical, confusing product. The laws of supply and demand still apply. And if you were to look back at 07 and 08 were dominated by the emotional response that you could keep building homes and people would keep buying them and you could keep getting new mortgages. And it was all driven by that. And again, it's a well-told story, but to understand that it was not a surprise that we were oversupplying the market. All indicators were telling us that. We were just being told this time it's different. And I think I mentioned this before when we spoke last year, but anytime you're in a meeting and somebody tells you this time it's different, that's when you get up and walk out. And, it's never different. It's just, where are we in the cycle? Where are we in what's happening? And, you can't oversupply and it not come back to bite you. It's just, you can have wishful thinking that made us go probably an extra year, 2 years of overbuilding without, course correcting. But it was obvious. So, oversupply we can't fix. And what we've done since then has been just shocking from a home building perspective. So, for example, and actually, I thought I was actually prepared and I had written down these numbers. So these numbers are going to be in the rough sense, but this is all from the Fed Bureau. If you were to take housing starts from 91 to 2000, on average, we did 1,400 new starts per month, right? So that's the average over that 10-year period. And if you take the period of time from 2001 through 91 to 2000, then if you take the time period from 2001 through 2010, including that overbuild period, we still only averaged about 1,400 starts per month. Now, during the boom, at sometimes we were doing 2,300 starts. And over that boom period, we averaged about 1,900. So definitely more than average for a sustained period of time. But even over a 10-year period, with all of the oversupply that happened, the undersupply quickly kicked in, and we averaged the same amount of starts as we did in 1990. Now, from 2010 through 2020, when the biggest generation since the boomers started coming into their home buying years and home renting years, we averaged over the last 10 years, including the 2020 and 2021 boom, we averaged less than 1,050 starts. So we have averaged over 10 years, 400 starts per month less than we had in the previous average of the previous 10 and 20 years before that. You can't look at that and say that we have addressed the supply issue, that there is oversupply. And yet you read articles. I won't cite the one because I don't want it to get more traffic, but there was a well-read, well-shared article, the next housing crisis, oversupply of homes. And you're like, can we just get to supply of homes first? Can we just get to can we go from undersupply to supply and then let's talk about oversupply? But and it's just very frustrating to be hearing people far smarter than me, and I'm not being disingenuous. They're far smarter than me. But they bring the emotional baggage of 07, 08, and it just clouds a lot of people's judgment on the fact that we don't have enough homes yet. And if we were serious about the affordability issue, which I brought up on our last episode, if we were serious about that, you would have local ordinances doing everything in their power to make housing more affordable, to make the cost of land less expensive. And the example of this, the best market to share this is the Texas real estate market. And now I have a little bit of concerns about Texas just because there's more homes under construction in Texas, like genuinely on a objective basis, not on the just how long it takes to build homes, but they're building more homes than they ever have in their history. And that's, there's only so many, California transplants that they can absorb. But, at the same time, what's wonderful about Texas is land is pretty cheap. Land is pretty cheap. The cost of developing is pretty cheap. And we've got a project in Houston where the finished lot sales in a booming part of the Houston submarket are 55,000, and they're being purchased by private and public home builders for 55,000 a finished lot. Meanwhile, we're seeing deals in Charlotte where the paper lot, the unfinished, the just barely entitled, is selling for 60 to 70,000 a lot. And that tells you the difference between a market where it's easy to get land entitled and land is plentiful compared to otherwise. So if we were serious about it, we would deal with the regulation part of it, but we're not. And I think the key thing for people to understand when we talk about supply, and I think I addressed this in our first podcast back last year, is for us to get enough homes to meet demand, we would have to make regulation very, very simple. We would need to make land owners, willing to sell at reasonable prices. We would need to have a labor force that can actually develop these lots. We would need to have the weather to actually play ball and stop being as temperamental and across the board as it is. And we would need home builders to be able to develop homes at probably twice as fast as they build homes, twice as fast as they currently are. None of those things are happening, but all of those things would need to happen for us to just meet our actual, generational demand. We can talk a little bit about, pricing demand, but that's what would need to happen just to meet the generational annual demand of housing. And it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. So in your estimation, we are not close to getting back to supply. We're far away.
We are 2 to 3 years. If we had continued the pace that we started this year on, we were 18 months to 2 years from hitting normal supply levels. The reaction of the market to the Fed rate hikes has indicated that we will probably build less homes next year and the year after than we built these previous 2 years, which means, ironically, the measures that were supposed to curb inflation will just result in less homes or fewer homes. And those homes will result in higher rent and arguably higher mortgage, which are two of the leading issues when it comes to inflation. But again, smarter people than me think that makes sense.
Fun. Yeah, the one terrible habit I'm trying to curb is when I'm laying in bed, oftentimes at night, I'll scroll through Reddit news. So just different, what's trending news wise. The other night, I stopped after 10 minutes and I was like, this is terrible. I have to stop doing this. It's all doom and gloom. And there were two, I scrolled through after I realized or had that feeling. I scrolled through, there were two big themes. One theme, which we will not touch on one bit, pretty much demise of the American Republic. The other one was housing is a complete disaster, right? Just absolute doom and gloom, left and right. You've referenced a couple of articles over this episode and the last one. And yeah, just I call that out as nothing else than it seems like there has been just a drastic influx ever since rates started to increase in February and March. There's a drastic influx of negative media attention, really scary media attention towards housing, which just seems completely counterproductive. But interests are not terribly aligned with anything other than getting eyeballs put to something. But just scrolling through something, I noticed that I just terrible doom and gloom. And even we have TVs throughout the office with the news on, and just housing can't get a break.
Well, it's so, and what's interesting, what's worth bearing in mind is, like as I said, I am actually quite bearish on some of the aspects of it, and what I'm laying out, I guess, what I'm laying out is sadly good for me, good for our industry, somewhat good for you guys in your industry, and good for builders, good for developers. That underlying demand is not going to go there, and if anything, we're going to see costs come into to alignment. So that's good, but there's going to be losers. Ultimately, the losers is the home buying public. Until we get more homes delivered in a more predictable, efficient manner, they're going to be paying too much, and they're going to be having to choose between renting and buying, and they're going to have to be choosing between roommates or putting off family formation. So that's not good. And again, as an industry, if we were serious about this, we should be, talking up what is actually happening and understanding that. But there's other people that it's bad for as well, and perhaps people who are listening to this podcast, or people who are interested in the real estate market. So, for example, there's a lot of people who put land under contract at a very high price and are taking it through the entitlement process right now, expecting that the builders are going to pay the same ridiculous deposits for any piece of land that they were a year ago. They're not. Builders are going to be more selective on what projects they do. And again, that's good for us because we only back projects that are fully entitled and pre-sold. But for that developer or land entitlement person, they just spend a long time, because land entitlement takes years. They spend a long time thinking that there was a pot of gold at the end that's now being snatched away, at least temporarily. Fix and flip, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that, just given where pricing is, because we do expect there to be some level of a cooling off. Interestingly, will be a decent time for realtors. You would have thought that during the housing boom we had over the last 2 years, that this would have been a great time to be a realtor. In fact, we've seen the number of realtors decline, because they don't have enough inventory. They don't have enough bread and butter things to sell. The what we talked about in the last episode, things selling within a day or so, that's not normal. They're normally required to sort of churn through some things, but also they're used to seeing more inventory on the resale side come to market. That's not happening. So that will be slightly better for them. And then for the person who has been sitting on their home for the last 2 to 3 years, has got a lot of equity that's built up in that home. And maybe they were getting ready to sell because they were going to move somewhere else. And they're going to have to get used to the fact that maybe it's going to take 2 to 3 weeks to sell. Maybe, shockingly, their home may be on the market for 2 to 3 months. That's not the end of the world. That's normal. Before the home that we bought in 2018, the previous home, when we put that on the market, it took, I think, 5 months to sell. In early 2019, we finally sold it. So we'd actually had 2 homes for a little bit, because that's normal.
Yeah.
People need to get used to what that means. So it's not that it's not, what I'm not saying is the good times are here forever, and nobody needs to worry, and ignore those silly headlines that telling you things are getting bad. But what I am saying, and this is something that you and I have talked about offline, and this is something that I when we as a team, we spent a great couple of days in the Lima One office in Greenville, sort of comparing ideas, because obviously we do A&D, you guys do vertical, and there's a very good synergy there. But I think one of the things that everybody heard me say, and we're probably sick of hearing me say, is that there is a huge difference between good and bad and better and worse. Is the market getting worse from a price perspective and from a time on the market and increasing inventory? Yes, compared to the crazy highs of 2021, it is getting worse. Is it bad? Not even close. Things need to get considerably worse. And I'll give you one quick example on that. And then maybe we can sort of talk a little bit about the pricing side, because I think one of the things I've mentioned to you is I consider myself an expert on housing from 1978 to 1984 and public builders gross margins over the last 10 to 15 years. So I want to use that knowledge as best I can. This is probably the only outlet, because my kids are certainly sick of hearing me talk about it. But standing unsold, finished but unsold inventory is a really good measure in a community. That tells us that in a new home community, how many homes has a builder built but not yet sold. And there was news from May to June that the numbers had gone from 0.3 to 0.4, which we were reliably informed by the survey provider was an increase of 33%, a 33% rise in unfinished inventory. Right. So that means that in 5 communities, there are 2 homes finished and unsold. Now, thankfully, we were able to look at the data, which was provided by the same group, and we saw that in 2019, the average number of finished but unsold homes was 1.8, which means in 5 communities, there was 8 unfinished homes, right? So, and that's what I'm talking about, good or bad, better or worse. Things could get 4 times worse and still be good. We could have 8 unfinished homes, sold but unfinished but unsold homes in communities, and in 5 communities, and that would actually be normal. However, we'll touch on this with the margins, it will be reported as bad.
Yeah. The nature of the beast. Can't do much about that. But that's why you have to go the extra step. You got to peel back a layer. You can't, if you just go off the headlines, dark and depressing, generally speaking. Right. Yeah. So with the time we have left, I definitely want to hear this, because you shot over a note and said I'm an expert on 78 to 84, and I'm just quite curious to hear about this. So please do forge ahead.
Yeah, well, I think what's important to note is, we talked about supply, and then you have demand, right? So demand gets impacted by multiple things. And as I said, we have a generational demand that's not going to get fixed. But, if they can't buy because of work, or they can't buy because of high mortgage rates, you need to sort of see, what happens. So the best thing we can do is look at 40 years ago and see what happened then. Now, starts plummeted, sales plummeted for a year and a half to 2 years, and then they came back up. Now, we didn't reach the 78 highs until the mid 80s, but in a real, what actually happened in housing, there was a year and a half of a drastic drop, and then it just sort of, again, went back to normal. So if you were cutting your cloth to normal, you had maybe a year of choppiness. But what's more interesting is what happened to the price of land and what happened to the price of homes. So the average home price in 1978 was $47,000, give or take. By 1982, when interest rates were at 18%, the average home price was $67,000. So now that was an increase. Now, what the economists will tell you is that on a inflation adjusted basis, that was a 5% decrease in home prices. Fine. Tell that to the person who has bought that home for $20,000 more than their neighbor did 3 to 4 years earlier, and convince them that actually they got a good deal. It's like, yeah, okay, on an inflation adjusted basis, the price went down, but on a, oh my God, what did I just pay? It went up considerably. And what we were seeing is that home sales, while they did drop, they still continued, again, because people need to live in homes. People need homes. We're not expecting anything like that. We're thinking, most of the smart people are thinking that, mortgage rates may go up to 6.5%, 7%. And if anything, the word seems to be that, that may be tempering off given the big R that everyone is afraid to mention. So, and if that happens, we'll start seeing things go down. But even if they do, that's 6%. Right now, prime is 4.75%. When we launched our platform, prime was 5.5% in 2018. We have to have some level of understanding of where things are. And then that brings us to, I know we don't have much time, that brings us sort of to pricing. And that's where the builders' profit margins are very important. And again, this is all public record. I'm not going to name specific builders, but I'm going to give very specific examples so that all you need to do is do a quick Google and you can work out who we're talking about. But there's a public builder. They announced that their profit margins in the first quarter were almost 30%. And historically, they'd never been above 20%. And there's another very, very, very large public builder that just announced last week or the other week that their profit margins were 29%. Historically, they'd never been above 13% until the last couple of years. So what does that tell us? Well, that tells us two important things. One, it tells us that demand was so high over the last 2 years that even in a labor shortage and even in a supply constrained market, and even with costs rising, the builders not only passed on those costs to the home buyer, but they actually added some extra profit on top. And quite frankly, I don't blame them, given how much the industry or the market freaks out at any ill wind. Can you blame them for trying to make as much money as possible when times are good? Right. And that's just another example of how unhealthy our market is, that the builders have to think like that. But it also tells us something else. And this is the part that people don't, I worry that doesn't sort of translate, which is they can reduce prices, they can absorb costs and still stay within their historic norms. And yes, they have reduced their prices. But did they really? It's the same thing with a person who put their home on the market for 1.4 million and then they sell it for 1.3. Yes, they took $100,000 deduction on what they had priced it, but they'd only bought the home for 700,000 or 800,000, and they're making 500,000 profit instead of 600,000 profit. So, we have to have some sort of norm on it. And where I worry is I'm expecting, again, this is our prediction. We're not saying that things are going to be rosy. I'm expecting that there's going to be a reduction in profit margins over the next quarter to 2 quarters. And that's kind of priced in with the builder stock price. They're trading at around 4 times earnings when they should be considerably higher, which means people, the market doesn't believe that those earnings are going to last. Mm-hmm. But my question for you is this, and it's sort of rhetorical, but that builder I mentioned, that the first one, margins in 30%, historically never above 20, around about 19. If they announce that their margins are 21% in the next quarter, will it be reported that they are still 10% higher than historic norms? Or will it be housing in chaos as public builders' earnings tumble 30%? We know what the answer is. And again, that's where I'm saying is, you have to understand what the actual data point is telling you and realize when to panic. And the thing that will make us should all panic is when inventory rises, to, 06, 07 levels, maybe even 05 levels is something that we should be worried about. And when, you start seeing new bills being delayed because builders are not putting out new deposits. Those are two things that can be tracked, one easier than the other, but those are things that are actually to worry about. Whether or not margins decrease, or whether or not interest rates go up, or whether or not, days on the market, go up. That's just noise. It's not actually telling you about the underlying health of the housing market, which is unhealthy because we don't have enough homes. But for those of us who are trying to fix that, is a very stable, healthy basis for the next, sadly, 3 to 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, very fair. John, thank you. You cut through the noise as always. I always learn a ton when I sit down with you.
Well, as I was saying to you at the start, we have a deal, right? So if I'm right, we're going to just keep replaying this over and over for the next couple of years. And if I'm wrong, you've given me your word, right? We're going to delete this. Nobody gets to see it. That's how the best economists work, right?
That's how the internet works, right? You just press delete and it's gone forever. So we absolutely will do that. You're a super smart guy, so fingers crossed everything pans out. But yeah, interesting times, and I can't thank you enough, my friend. I truly, anytime I chat with you, whether it's here, whether it's the conference, I always walk away a more well-informed human being, and that, to me, that's the
We do our best, and again, we love sort of working with you guys. I think it's great to have that sort of relationship where we can look at things together, discuss the market together, keep ourselves in check, and it's always good to hear things you don't agree with or to hear other perspectives. And I think the sort of Setanta Lima One connection, really, gives us that difference where we can, offer something that, gives both of our inputs and both of our perspectives, as opposed to allowing, one view to dominate the other. So we're very appreciative of that. Always love talking to you. Again, genuinely, love listening to your podcast, as do most of my team. I think it's a great listen and a very valuable tool. And congrats on the continued success, and may you have more.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Too kind. And anyone listening, please do check out Setanta, Setanta, and John Curry, CEO. Thank you again for joining, my friend.
No problem, sir. Have a good one.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. Take care.